On March 27, 1945, the American and Serbian prisoners of war at OFLAG XIII-B in Hammelburg spotted German trucks and tanks racing by the compound at full speed. With this, they knew they were about to be rescued. Suddenly, American tanks burst through the barbed wire fences in several places, firing their guns overhead and to each side. As shells exploded around the camp's perimeter, the prisoners were overwhelmed by a joyous feeling of liberation. Amidst the euphoria of the apparent rescue, a figure emerged from one of the tanks, Captain Abraham Baum, the young leader of the daring Task Force Baum. His eyes scanned the sea of prisoners, searching for one man in particular, Lieutenant Colonel John K. Waters. But as the two men shook hands, a flicker of concern crossed Baum's face. The camp held far more prisoners than intelligence had suggested, nearly 1,500 instead of the expected 300. The captain's small task force, already battered from the relentless German resistance they had faced on the journey to Hammelburg, was ill-equipped to evacuate such a vast number of prisoners. Over 50 miles into enemy territory, the daunting reality set in for the captain. The odds of a successful extraction were dangerously low. In fact, Task Force Baum was about to become one of the biggest disasters of the final stages of World War II. On the evening of March 25, 1945, Lieutenant General George Patton, commander of the 3rd U.S. Army, arrived at 12th Corps headquarters to meet with their leader, Major General Menton S. Eddy, and deliver sensitive orders for a daring expedition. Patton called for an immediate armored raid to liberate 300 prisoners from OFLAG XIII-B, a POW camp near Hammelburg, Germany. This installation housed a significant number of soldiers from the Battle of the Bulge and transfers from Polish POW camps to prevent their liberation by advancing Russian forces. But the camp was also entirely surrounded by barbed wire fences with watchtowers and heavily armed German soldiers. Allied intelligence pointed out that there was a big chance that amongst the American officers being held, there was Patton's own son-in-law, Lieutenant Colonel John Waters. Despite the camp's location well over 50 miles beyond friendly lines, Patton was determined to uncover the truth. This raid was not the first liberation raid of World War II. General Douglas MacArthur's troops had recently executed 4 successful, high-profile operations in the Philippines to free prisoners of war, with one of them conducted in northern Luzon on February 1, 1945, making headlines all over the world. According to some historians, upon hearing about these raids, Patton vowed to take action to outdo his comrade. Eddy was stunned by the daring proposal, as this meant he would have sent a large part of his command to a single mission, while the rest of the Corps moved toward the increasingly important Ruhr Pocket. Concerned by the lack of detailed planning, he urged Patton to reconsider, fearing severe criticism if the mission failed. Yet the general remained resolute and turned to the 4th Armored Division. However, 3 additional key leaders, all with recent valuable experience, objected due to the mission's constraints and the men's exhausted state. That same evening, 23-year-old Captain Abraham Baum was lying atop a half-truck's engine, trying to warm himself up, when a courier summoned him to division headquarters. Upon arrival, he found himself in the presence of General Patton, 12th Corps Commander Major General Menton Eddy, and all his superiors. Baum, a young captain known for his scrappy leadership style, immediately felt out of place. He later recalled, quote, "I thought, what the hell am I doing here?" But his superiors knew about the captain's battle-tested abilities, and just then he was briefed on the mission: to take 300 men and 50 vehicles well behind enemy lines to liberate OFLAG XIII-B. Crucial details remained unknown: the camp's exact location, the number of POWs held there, and even the presence of Patton's son-in-law. No one but Patton supported the idea of a small task force. One of the officers argued that the mission required a full combat command of 3,500 to 5,000 men, but he insisted there wasn't time to organize such a mission. With the leader of his mission chosen, Patton prepared to leave. Before departing, however, he took Baum aside and promised him a Medal of Honor should the mission succeed. Baum's response was characteristically bold. He didn't need a bribe. Hastily organized in a single day, Task Force Baum departed on the evening of March 26, 1945, from the vicinity of Aschaffenburg, Germany. Their arsenal included 6 M5A1 Stuart light tanks, 10 M4A3 Shermans, 3 self-propelled 105mm guns, 27 half-tracks, and 8 jeeps. Soon after launching the raid, Baum's forces would be out of range for supporting artillery and without dedicated air support. Navigation was another challenge, as they only had a few basic road maps for the entire task force, and the camp's exact location relative to the town of Hammelburg was unknown. The troops would have to interrogate German civilians to locate the camp. In order to traverse the approximately 50 miles behind enemy lines, maintaining the element of surprise was paramount to their success. By the evening of the 26th, Task Force Baum had reached the town of Aschaffenburg. In order to clear the way and penetrate enemy lines, 2 companies of tanks and infantry were ordered to attack a nearby town. This plan hinged on swiftly moving through undetected, allowing the task force to continue under the cover of darkness. However, navigating armored units through towns at night was no easy feat, as narrow roads and countless enemy hiding spots could compromise their advance. Though reportedly lightly defended, the area quickly became a slow, house-to-house battle as infantry and vehicles approached, and what should have taken half an hour stretched into hours. As the intense enemy fire rained down, an anti-tank rocket broke down several vehicles, including one of their Sherman tanks. By 11 p.m., a restless Baum, frustrated by the delay, demanded to know why Patton was so determined to rescue these prisoners. Major Alexander Stiller revealed the truth. Patton's son-in-law was among them. Stiller himself had been sent along because Lieutenant Colonel Waters knew him personally and could identify him. Despite his anger, Baum knew duty came first, and only half an hour later, he ordered the advance to continue, instructing units to keep the road open. Slowly but steadily, the captain guided his task force through the town. Task Force Baum reached the Hammelburg highway at 2:30 a.m., miraculously without casualties. By this point, however, the Germans were well aware of their presence, and the deeper they ventured into enemy territory, the more resistance they would find. As dawn broke on March 27th, Task Force Baum was still 35 miles away from Hammelburg. Their next challenge, crossing the Zoll River near Gmunden am Main. The Americans pressed on, firing at enemy troops and rail cars as they approached their target bridge. Little did they know, they were heading straight into a German division's assembly area. As a tank and infantry platoon attempted to cross, the enemy regrouped and detonated the bridge in a thunderous explosion, claiming several American lives. Captain Baum was wounded in the leg and hand, and 3 tanks were lost. After calling for air support, a few P-47s arrived to bomb the rail yards. But the situation had become dire, and Baum realized he had no choice but to alter course, turn his column around, and use back roads to evade the enemy. Pushing towards Hammelburg, Task Force Baum captured local civilians for intel on alternate routes. By mid-morning, they were just 10 miles from their objective when a German reconnaissance plane spotted the column. With the element of surprise lost, Baum knew time was of the essence. He ordered his men to advance as quickly as possible, regardless of obstacles. Hours later, the exhausted and fuel-depleted column reached Hammelburg's outskirts. The prison camp, OFLAG XIII-B, lay tantalizingly close, just 2 miles south of town. However, a powerful enemy awaited. The veteran Panzerjäger unit had positioned 8 Elephant vehicles with anti-tank guns along their route. As the Americans approached, the Elephants unleashed their firepower, disabling 2 medium tanks, a light tank, 5 half-tracks, and a jeep before withdrawing. Despite the onslaught, Task Force Baum reached Hammelburg at last. By the time they arrived at OFLAG XIII-B that afternoon, the soldiers had been engaged in continuous combat for 12 grueling hours against fierce German resistance. For 2 additional hours, the American troops exchanged fire with the stalwart German defenders of the prison camp, but never managed to breach the gates. Following this fruitless battle, Camp Commander General Gunther von Geckel summoned a small American POW team to serve as an intermediary in an attempt to negotiate a ceasefire. Among those men was Waters himself. However, as they approached the task force, a German guard fired at the group, seriously wounding the lieutenant colonel, who had to be rushed back into the facilities for emergency surgery. Eventually, Task Force Baum stormed through OFLAG XIII-B's gates, only to face a shocking reality. Instead of 300 men, There were well over 1,500 prisoners inside the camp. Baum was stunned. After days of grueling combat, low on fuel, infantry, and vehicles, the task force could only take a small fraction of the POWs back to Allied territory. Climbing atop his jeep, he explained the situation. Only field-grade officers would ride back with the task force. The remaining men could either march beside the fleet or stay until liberation. With most POWs severely malnourished or injured, the majority had no choice but to stay behind. Even Waters, the reason behind the entire operation, couldn't leave. Nevertheless, about 200 brave men decided to take their chances and attempt to return to American lines. Just after 8 p.m., Task Force Baum and the POWs were ready to begin the return trip, and the small column of vehicles navigated in the dark of a moonless night, unaware they were heading straight into an ambush. German infantry combat school officials struck the lead Sherman with an anti-tank rocket. Amid the chaos, the American crew fled their tank, leaving it running. An opportunistic German soldier seized control, driving it off route and using its radio to draw more tanks into the ambush. In a matter of moments, the enemy had decimated 4 more Shermans. Evaluating the situation, Baum recognized his fuel reserves were too depleted to return to friendly lines. He opted to halt until dawn, allowing his troops to search for fuel, or failing that, cover the maximum distance before inevitably abandoning their vehicles and continuing on foot. As morning broke on the 28th, the remnants of Task Force Baum attempted to press forward. However, they soon found themselves under fire from all sides, encircled by German forces that had stealthily surrounded their position during the night. A brutal, lopsided battle erupted. One by one, Task Force Baum's remaining vehicles succumbed to the relentless German fire. As the last tank smoldered, Baum, his voice hoarse from shouting orders, made one final, gut-wrenching call, quote, "Every man for himself." The unit instantly fractured into desperate individuals in small groups, each scrambling for survival in the chaos of enemy-held territory. While German troops rounded up most of the men, some made it, including Baum. Gasping for breath, Captain Baum slumped against a tree when a buggy approached, carrying 2 Home Guard civilians. Just as he tried to take his .45 out from under his Mackinaw with his bandaged hand, he was quickly shot in the groin. After his injury, Captain Abraham Baum ended up in the same hospital as Lieutenant Colonel Waters, where the two finally met. On April 6th, just 9 days after the failed liberation attempt, Camp Hammelburg was liberated. The disruption caused by Task Force Baum's raid allowed the 4th Armored Division to advance 75 miles with relatively little resistance, exploiting weakened enemy defenses and making substantial territorial gains. The operation concluded in a devastating and expensive failure. Captain Baum's force suffered severe casualties. 32 men lost their lives, while 247 were wounded, missing, or captured. Only a small remnant of the original force, 35 soldiers, successfully made it back to friendly lines. The true motivations behind General Patton's decision to send an ill-equipped task force to a prisoner camp remain unknown. Some believe Waters' rescue was the main objective, while others think it was an attempt to one-up his rival, General Douglas MacArthur. Later, when General Patton visited Captain Abraham Baum in an Allied hospital, the injured man told his superior, quote, "You know, sir, it's difficult for me to believe that you would have sent us on that mission to just rescue one man." In response, Patton only said, quote, "That's right, Abe. I wouldn't." In the end, Captain Abraham Baum received the Distinguished Service Cross instead of the promised Medal of Honor. This change in decoration likely spared Patton from a potentially damaging congressional investigation. Yet for Baum, medals held little significance. His sole focus was on healing and rejoining his troops. Eventually he did, and the captain fought until the very last stage of the war, standing proudly among his men.